Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we're watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 3, Episode 11, Past Tense, Part 1. This episode aired January 9th, 1995. We've moved into 95.
Indeed. And we're having another two-parter. We haven't had one of those in a while.
That's right. Well, everything is weird today. We tried to do this yesterday. It didn't work. We're trying again today. And we're also off by a week because you had a root canal. Everything's messed up.
Oh yeah, that was fun.
Before we start on this one, anything from the last episode called Fascination?
No, it was perfect.
I feel like I might have been too hard on it. I mean, it probably could have had a neutral instead of a thumbs down, but it just could have been better, especially considering how well we started the season.
Yeah, it could have definitely been better. I wasn't impressed.
No, it was definitely not impressive. And when we tried to do this yesterday, we did talk a little bit about how these shorter seasons on modern TV seem to eliminate episodes like this.
Yeah.
It's good and bad because you do need a little bit of the bad in Star Trek. I mean, there's 800 episodes. You need some stuff to complain about. Not everything can just be on fire action.
That's a good point. You've got to have the episodes we can complain about.
Yeah.
If you're not complaining, you're not living.
Right, said somebody's grandmother. Well, should we get started?
Absolutely.
In the cold open, the Defiant is headed to Earth. The entire team seems to be on board as we head to the annual Starfleet Symposium to speak about the current situation in the Gamma Quadrant. In his log, Sisko mentions looking forward to this and also looking forward to visiting his sister in Portland. I didn't know he had a sister. Did you know he had a sister?
I had forgotten he had a sister.
Okay. Julian and Sisko are happy to see Earth, but Dax complains that the seas aren't purple enough, and Kira thinks that they're not green enough, and everybody's just bagging on Earth.
I didn't think the oceans in Bajor looked particularly green.
I don't remember that. It seems weird. We don't complain about other homeworlds, so why are they all whining about Earth? It just seems strange.
Plus, the Bajoran seas are green because of all the Cardassian environmental damage that they did. It's all full of pollution.
That is maybe true. Bashir says there's no place like home, no matter what color the water is, and I like that we're still quoting The Wizard of Oz 300 years from now.
It was a very popular movie.
Yeah. Then we talk about a formal dinner that they're all supposed to attend. Miles says he stayed an enlisted man so he wouldn't have to go to things like that. Odo and Kira don't want to go either, so it'll just be Dax, Sisko, and Julian.
Couldn't Sisko just order Miles to go? I order you to suffer too.
Well, I'm sure he could, but it didn't seem that important because he doesn't do that. And it's a good thing he doesn't do that.
Yeah, you really don't want the lower classes mixing with the Starfleet elite.
Oh.
They'll get the wrong idea.
Right. Then they get an emergency message from the only person left on Deep Space Nine, Quark. He's calling to tell Sisko that the Grand Nagus wants to remind him of the critical role he played in establishing contact with the Dominion. And oh, by the way, can he help get his nephew out of some trouble with Starfleet?
He's calling in a favor. Very Ferengi.
Definitely. Sisko and Quark now quote some rules of acquisition at each other, and I'm not sure any of this conversation matters except to get Quark's face into the episode because this is the only opportunity.
I think it's also to show that Sisko has been reading up on the rules of acquisition and now knows them all.
Yeah, he's clearly been reading up on them.
Well, I like the way he quotes the 217th rule back at Quark, which is you can't free a fish from water. This shows Sisko learning to interact in the environment that he's in. He's having to deal with the Ferengi, so it makes sense. He'd learn the rules of acquisition so he could use them against the Ferengi.
I find it hard to believe that he's actually memorized all of them. I feel like he probably studied them, picked out ones that he could utilize, and he committed those to memory.
Yeah.
But if you're just going to use it for negotiations or for blackmail, which is more likely what Sisko would use it for, you're just going to pull those out of your pocket. Yeah.
That's why he's learned them all.
I see. Okay. Now Bashir, Dax, and Sisko beam down to Starfleet headquarters. But as they beam away, there's a peculiar beeping, and Miles says there was a power fluctuation in the annular confinement beam. Then he digs a little and says, uh-oh, they never materialized at their destination. They're just gone.
That doesn't seem very good.
Yeah, that was very dramatic and a big rise in the music. And then we go down to a planet somewhere, which we think is Earth, and we see Sisko lying face down on the ground. Someone pokes him with a shotgun, telling him to wake up. And two guys dressed as, I can only describe it, Ghostbusters, pull Sisko and Bashir to their feet. The one Ghostbuster wants to go home and not deal with these guys, but the first Ghostbuster, the older guy, asks, "What are you, an anarchist?" There's a law against sleeping in the streets.
I assume this guy is like the discount Venkman because they couldn't get Bill Murray for this role. He's probably quite expensive at this point.
That could be. They make a comment about the pajamas that Sisko and Bashir are wearing, meaning their uniforms. And that's when I notice that their comm badges are missing. They call them DIMS and ask for ID. And this is when we learn about something called the sanctuary districts. And we also learn that the year is 2024 and we have traveled back in time.
Uh-oh.
So they get marched off across the street and the camera pans down the subway stairs that they were next to. And we find Dax sitting on the ground, also unconscious, but she's sitting perfectly upright, awkwardly kind of leaning on the stairs.
Yeah.
And we cue the theme song.
I feel Dax passed out at the bottom of a stairwell is based on Curzon, probably a very common occurrence.
Yeah, probably.
This time, though, she's not completely drunk.
No. Well, as far as we know.
No, that's true.
She could be always drinking like Karen on Will and Grace. She's got a flask.
Oh, yeah, you know Curzon had a flask.
We come back from the theme, and a very tall guy in a fancy suit passes Dax on the stairs, but he stops to check on her, and she wakes up saying, "Oh, my head." And he asks if she was robbed and helps her up. He asks if they got her ID and her credit chips. She astutely figures she'd better play along and says they got everything, except her brooch, meaning her comm badge.
Nice. This was
Yes.
good. After 8 lifetimes, she should be able to think on her feet pretty quickly.
Yes. She says she got separated from her friends. He tells her she'd better order a replacement ID quickly, and she can do that from his interface terminal in his office. She accepts the offer, and we learn his name is Chris Brenner. He says he doesn't get to help a damsel in distress every day, and then he helps her up the steps towards his office.
I think the reveal here should have been that he's actually a time-traveling David Bowie from 1983.
He does look a little bit like David Bowie.
He
I
looks
agree.
exactly like David Bowie from like 1983.
He seems like he's taller and thinner, but yeah, there's resemblance for sure.
So far, we have the Ghostbusters and David Bowie in one episode.
Yeah. It's a very 80s episode.
I think the final thing in this scene is when Bowie's taking her to his office.
Bowie.
The way Farrell is just looking around and she's doing this great, where exactly am I kind of freaked out look.
And she doesn't know to ask when am I yet either.
Yes. The other thing I did like was how she really rolled with this very quickly.
Yeah.
It seems very fluid the way she did it.
Agreed. Back on the Defiant, Miles and an NPC are checking sciencey things and running diagnostics. Kara comes in saying Starfleet says the transporter sequence deteriorated immediately after the team was beamed away, but Miles says that's not what his logs show. They definitely materialized somewhere, we just don't know where. He says the adjustment he made to the confinement beam was due to the accumulation of chronoton particles on the ship's hull, which are emitted by the cloaking device. Sounds suspicious.
Yes.
He then finds an increase in temporal energy before the transport started. That's a big clue.
Oh yeah, we have chronoton particles and temporal energy.
There's so much Star Trek time science, right? Those are always things you hear when it comes to time stuff. Yep. Down on the planet, Julian said they must have experienced the transporter shock, knocking them out. Convenient. They're definitely in San Francisco because they caught a glimpse of the Golden Gate Bridge as they were walking, which they didn't show us. I felt like they could have shown us that, but anyway.
Yeah, there's only so much budget.
Right. Somebody must have stolen their comm badges while they were unconscious, and they wonder where Dax is. Sisko says they need to find her and find a way home. The Ghostbuster guys are filling out paperwork as they escort them into the Sanctuary District.
If you notice, the signs in the background with Sanctuary District and Maine on them basically prove Apple has taken over the entire future.
Oh, because of the font?
Yeah, they're all the old Apple Mac font called Chicago that had the giant wide M.
So now we get our first exposition. As we learn, these districts were in every major U.S. city at the time, meaning in 2024, I guess. And we see a lot of seemingly poor people just camping in the streets. Sisko says they're all just people without jobs or homes.
It looks like the old Hoovervilles from the 1930s, the sort of shanty towns during the Great Depression.
Ghostbuster 1 lets Ghostbuster 2 go home because he keeps whining, and we continue marching to wherever we're going.
He is very whiny.
Yep. Dax, meanwhile, is in a very different place. She's sitting at a desk in a very clean office building with a view of the city. She's tapping away at a computer screen with a stylus of some kind. That was cool, I thought. Curly hair guy Brenner, or Bowie, comes in and asks if she was able to order a new ID. She says she was able to do it, though it took a while to convince them she was who she said she was.
Oh.
Her ID and transit pass will be delivered in a few hours.
Oh, Dax, you little computer hacker, you.
Yeah, who do you think she says she was? I mean, she had to steal somebody's ID.
Right. You know, it must be killing her not to be able to say, after 8 lifetimes, I know my way around a computer.
Well, yeah. She probably used these computers for as old as Dax is.
I have some comments on that in the overanalysis.
Oh, okay. Well, then David Bowie asks about her unusual markings. He said he had some tattoos back in the 90s like everybody else, but he had to have them removed to get government contracts. He's surprised that she doesn't know who he is. He says, you know, Brenner Information Systems, Interface Operations, Net Access, Channel 90. And then Dax pretends to know who he is, which was really funny, I thought.
Yeah.
He asks if there's any way to get a hold of her friends, but she doesn't know how. And this is where that complete lack of cell phones seems so comical in the year 2024. But anyway, it's the 90s, so they didn't have those.
Also, in this timeline, the world is very different because you would have had the rise of Khan, etc. So it's difficult to parallel that to the real world of now.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. But, you know, Khan was in my timeline too, so.
Really?
I saw that movie. Oh, that's not what you meant? Never mind. Then we go back to the Sanctuary District and we learn it's really just one gigantic DMV. That was my impression of it. As Bashir and Sisko are being processed into the system and then waiting in an endless line of people. Also, the room is quite a dump. I mean, it's totally the DMV.
Yeah. Clearly, the budget for the Sanctuary District is not very high. It does look a little bit dumpy.
Yeah.
The other thing I noticed was it seems to be they were using a private system to look for the fingerprints and their information.
Yeah, because there was advertising in it.
Yeah. So have government or city services all been privatized at this point?
It is possible. I thought that too. And I think you're supposed to think that. That's why they had that advertisement in there. Yep. Also, I thought the fingerprinting and all of that was comically analog.
Yeah.
It looked like a copy machine, definitely from the 90s.
Oh, yes.
Well, the Ghostbuster is surprised that he doesn't find them in the system, but he won't let them go because they don't have names or money and are dressed like clowns.
Yeah, the older guy, he just seems to be very cynical. He doesn't actually seem to be cruel or nasty. No. He just seems to sort of have a resigned, cynical edge of, this is my job, it sucks, but I have to do it.
But he does it. But he's doing the job. Yeah, exactly. I call him Ghostbuster 1. Well, back to the Defiant, and Kira is telling someone in Starfleet that nobody beams to the ship until they figure out what's going on with the transporter, which seems wise.
Yep. Kira is in command as well.
Yep. Miles comes in saying the temporal surge was caused by an explosion of a microscopic singularity passing through the solar system. I had to back up and listen to that a few times because I was like, what? But okay.
There's a lot of Star Trek science.
Yeah, there's a bunch of sciencey stuff right here. But basically, the transporter beam was transported to somewhere else in time. He doesn't know exactly when, but it's likely they beamed somewhere in a different century. And again, dramatic music.
And they do the classic shocked look on Kira's face as they go to the ad break.
Yeah, she has a lot of shocked looks in this episode. It started at the beginning when he said they're gone, and she was like, Down in the DMV, a person sitting next to Sisko is drawing on Sisko's uniform, like with a pen. And Sisko just picks up the guy's arm and moves it, and he starts drawing on someone else. I think we're supposed to just see that there are many mental health issues going untreated here. I believe that was the point of that scene. Sisko's looking around, and he notices the date on the wall is Friday, August 30th, 2024. It also says that the temperature is 15 C. This is the thing most unlikely to happen in 3 years.
So America has converted to centigrade. Yeah.
Of all these things in this episode that are going to happen, this is the one that's not going to happen.
As I mentioned earlier, really this is a different timeline from our reality anyway.
Because of Khan. So Khan also changed us from Fahrenheit to centigrade.
Exactly.
Nice. Khan implemented the metric system in the U.S. Wow. What a guy. Sisko tells Julian he's realized the time period they're in.
And Bashir is really annoyed by this whole environment. To mention your point earlier, he goes on to actually have a mini rant about how most of the people there have mental health issues and are just being ignored.
Yes, and this comes up a few times in the episode for sure.
Yeah.
Julian is like really focused on solvable problems. And of course, when the problems are so large, but you're only looking at the things 10 feet around you, problems can seem solvable. But he's so focused on that, he's like not paying attention to the big picture. So thank goodness Sisko is at least paying attention.
Right.
And also Sisko is the one who knows history because somehow Bashir, the genius kid, knows nothing about anything.
I think that points to Bashir's focus. Like you said, he's focused on the small things. He's kind of laser focused on what's in front of him almost.
Problems he can solve in front of him. Yeah. Well, Sisko talks about the Bell Riots, a violent disturbance in American history that took place right here in this sanctuary district, the first week of September, which starts in a few days. He says they need to get out of here or they're going to be caught right in the middle of it all. Drama, into the ad break.
Oh, and another great close there. Bashir has that look of, oh, this just keeps getting better, doesn't it?
Yeah. When we come back from the ad, we go into another big exposition scene as Sisko now explains the riots to Julian, who doesn't know about this period in history, which he said he doesn't know about because it's too depressing. And again, I find this a relatable thing about Julian, right? It's first it was the sautéed beets. Now it's, I don't want to talk about historical periods that are too depressing. I can totally relate to that.
Well, the way Bashir is being written now, he's much more of an empathetic character. It would some ways kind of make sense that he would look at this part of human history and maybe gloss over it and go, that's awful. I don't really want to read about that.
I wonder if Julian is slowly morphing into me.
Oh.
We'll see. We have two things in common.
So you're saying that this new character that they brought in and just called him Bashir is turning into you?
Might be me.
Oh.
Let's see.
I wonder what happened to the other Bashir.
Who cares? Lost in a transporter accident.
And then they replaced him with
Yeah.
one of the replicants from that planet that copied Miles.
Oh, yeah, for sure. All right, so we continue on here with our exposition. The sanctuary residents take over the district, holding some of the guards hostage. The government sends in troops to restore order, and hundreds of residents are killed. Julian is upset that they won't be able to do anything to prevent it. Sisko says maybe it will make you feel better to know that the riots are one of the watershed events of the 21st century. The riots were named after Gabriel Bell, who is one of the residents guarding the hostages. The government troops stormed the place because they've heard the rumor that the hostages were killed, but it turns out Bell was protecting them, and he sacrifices his own life to save them. He becomes a national hero. Outrage over his death and the death of the other residents leads to the sanctuaries being torn down, and the U.S. finally begins dealing with the social problems of the previous 100 years. Sisko warns that if we get in the way of this at all, we risk impacting a pivotal moment in history, and we cannot do that.
I kind of felt for Bashir here. The theory that you can't interfere is very different when you're actually on the ground.
Yeah.
Both knowing something really bad is about to happen and being in a position where you could actually help the people around you.
Right.
But you can't because of the impact that would have on the timeline.
Well, it's really easy to say something and then it's very different to be right in the middle of it, you know, and to be watching people suffering or dying or whatever when you know you could help. It's very different. It's almost like that thing we were saying about the people in Starfleet making decisions while living in paradise. It's like you're just not able to feel the situation because you're not there.
And this is worse because you're in the middle of it and unable to act.
You can't do it. Yeah, exactly. I found this whole thing really interesting to be watching this in the middle of current events in 2021. And it's so hard to believe that riots will change the world based on how many riots are going on around the entire globe, mostly obviously in this country. But it's just hard to believe that anything will change because of it, because it just seems like the next day is exactly the same. So I just found it really interesting that we're watching this in the time period that we're living.
Yes, I get what you mean.
Well, Ghostbuster 1 finally says it's their turn, and they head into a little office to meet with a DMV employee who is looking over their paperwork. She says if she'd known they were gimmies, not dims, she could have processed their paperwork sooner. We learn here that the gimmies are unemployed folks, but the dims should be in hospitals. So these are the mentally ill people, I guess. Yeah. She says the government can't afford to do anything about them, so they end up here in the sanctuary instead. She says, I hate it, but that's the way it is. She tells them that they have to stay in the sanctuary while they're unemployed. They do offer job placement, but jobs are hard to come by with the state of the economy. She gives them ration cards and says they can use them to get food and water. And she says all of the buildings in the district are there for anyone to use, so they can stay anywhere. Which, that doesn't work. You should... Somebody's got to be in charge of this kind of thing. You can't just say, go find yourself a room. Oh, for crying out loud. She warns them to stay away from the Ghostbusters, meaning the security people, and to watch out for ghosts, who are people who haven't integrated well into the sanctuary. They can be dangerous. They take their cards and they leave. And you again see how dirty everything is. The walls are dirty. They're in such a rundown building.
Oh, yeah, it's very rundown. And I like this use of localized slang. Gimmies and dims and ghosts. They have these terms to label the people.
Yep.
It gave it sort of a real feel to it.
Organic. Yeah. Well, meanwhile, Dax is trying to use her comm badge to call Sisko and Bashir, but getting no response. Wouldn't it still be ringing with whoever had it? You'd think they'd answer.
Plus, the technology that's in those little badges.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be dangerous to leak into mainstream?
You would think so. Maybe they just melted them down, or they just tossed them in a dumpster and nobody ever noticed them again.
That's a point.
The tall guy comes in, saying his assistant got her a room at the Clift. He's checked the hospitals for her friends and hasn't found them. And then he invites her to a party that he's holding, and she says she'll be there.
Dax is blending in just great.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Yep.
Making friends, yeah.
Plus his drinks, so...
Yeah. Hanging out at parties with David Bowie, it's all good for Dax.
Oh, yeah.
Sisko and Bashir go from building to building, but ominous people on the steps keep telling them to move on to the next building, which was my whole point about you can't just say, oh, go find a room. Everything's open. And Bashir thinks these people who are guarding the buildings are lying about them being full, but overcrowding was a common problem in the districts. As they walk, Bashir is upset that sick people aren't getting treated. There are treatments available even in this time period, he says.
Bashir is slowly getting more disturbed by what he's seeing.
Yep. But Sisko says people have just given up trying to solve these enormous social problems.
Yes.
That I do buy. Bashir finds this even more upsetting. He wonders if humans are really any different from Cardassians or Romulans. He says if we're frightened enough or desperate enough, would we stay true to our ideals? Sisko says he doesn't know, but it's his job to make sure we never have to find out. That was an interesting line.
Very philosophical from Bashir. Does the Federation go backwards if push comes to shove? That would be the question. Which is really interesting because Discovery kind of answers that.
That's true.
So yeah, more crossover between Discovery and DS9.
Yeah, Discovery, total love letter to Deep Space Nine, no doubt.
I will disagree with his question of are humans any different from Cardassians and Romulans? We don't see any poverty on Cardassia. Is that because they hide the poor or just put them to death?
Well...
Plus, Cardassia is a controlled fascist society.
But I think that's his point, right? Did they get to the point where they were so desperate that they became insular? You can see that they certainly don't treat their children right. So I don't know what the point was he was trying to make.
Because they're not the same, because you see humanity evolved.
Yeah.
The Cardassians seem to embrace some kind of complete state control of every facet of life. And the Romulans became this backstabbing, constantly clawing, trying to get to the top kind of race, where you have to have cameras outside your house because your enemies might be hiding, waiting to kill you when you came out.
Yeah, the Cardassians have that whole master race problem.
Yeah.
Right? And the Romulans are more like the government should control all of the decisions and the way that you think and the way that you act, which, you can draw your own conclusions about how that aligns with history. But I guess his point is, did desperation turn them into those two things?
Oh, interesting.
And would the same kind of desperation happen to Starfleet, or the Federation, I guess?
But he was specifically speaking about humans, and the answer is no.
The answer is no, because of who they are, because this is their history. They're walking in their own history. He answers his own question by existing.
That is true.
Yeah. Well, then they walk into some thugs robbing someone, and Sisko has to stop Bashir from interfering. A guy in a hat who is very obnoxious, saying, "Gimmies have no sense of fun," meaning Sisko and Bashir. They walk off, and the guy sarcastically tells them to enjoy their stay, and he waves at them, shouting bye. You know that guy is big trouble, and we're going to see him again.
I think Brooks is putting some real feeling into this role. He's giving the impression of he really wants to do something. It's the one thing that's worse than the Prime Directive, which is his actions could actually destroy the timeline. He was managing to give this impression of someone who was really conflicted. Just from his sort of the body language and the way he's acting and he's talking, he's almost seeming resigned. Yeah. And we've not seen that from Sisko. He isn't resigned to anything. He's a doer.
He's trying to melt into the wall and disappear. And he's doing that because he feels like that's the responsible thing he needs to do because he doesn't want to impact the future. And that is not the Sisko we're used to. But also, I think causes are important to him and he understands this cause. And he's, what I mean. He's trying to allow this cause to play itself out.
It's something that has to happen.
Right. Back on the Defiant, they're talking about focusing the transporter beam through the chronoton particles to allow them to time travel. No problem, sure. That's easy. And Miles says they don't know where exactly to travel to, and there are only enough polarized chronotons to make 5 or 6 attempts. Kira says, well, we'll have to take our chances, and the hard part will be finding some volunteers crazy enough to risk getting lost in time. Miles says he knows some likely candidates, and they smile at each other as Odo looks super confused. That was very cute.
Why would he be surprised at this point?
I don't know.
This is the woman who is prepared to use the transporter at warp. She has no fear.
That's right. Yeah, she has no fear. She's got to do what's got to be done.
Yeah.
I think, though, from his point of view, he's probably thinking, wait, we don't know where in time, and it's over centuries, and you're just going to pop into a couple places and hope for the best. I mean, it is a terrible plan, right? Let's just say it's a terrible Deep Space Nine plan.
They're going to transport down to San Francisco at a particular time period and stand in the streets shouting, Ben Sisko!
Like, what about Bob?
Commander
Dr.
Ben
Leo
Sisko!
Marvin. That's exactly the plan. And then if he doesn't answer, they beam back up, and then they try another spot.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great.
I thought here maybe Odo, it wasn't surprise, it was more concern.
Oh, yeah.
That they would be hurt or lost in time rather than surprised that they would do it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So Sisko and Bashir slept in a quiet corner in the street under some blankets. Bashir says if they ever find a way home, he'll never complain about DS9's Cardassian beds again.
I keep wondering about the bathroom situation here.
Yeah. I didn't see any porta potties anywhere.
Yeah, I was thinking that would be extraordinarily unpleasant.
Yeah, it's a good question. It can't smell good out there. In fact, Bashir does make a comment about smell later.
Yeah, I don't know what they're complaining about, though, because they've located an excellent lower ground floor apartment. That's a prime spot that they're in there.
Uh-huh. Oh, God. Sisko wants to get up on the roof of one of the buildings to assess a way out. So they try again to get into one of the buildings, but the guys guarding the doors aren't very keen on letting them in. Bashir asks if they can make some kind of deal, even though they have nothing to trade. But ultimately, they end up trading their uniforms, which I'm not sure why they would do that. Why would they want those pajamas instead of the clothes, which appear to be warmer to me and in better condition? I don't know. This whole thing was a little fuzzy, but okay.
Well, I think the guy who was talking to the leader of the little group there, he clearly was a cosplayer.
Oh, he wanted a costume.
Those are pretty good uniforms.
Yeah.
I also have to point out the guy who was the leader of that little group who wouldn't let them in, he had a remarkably clean white shirt under his jacket.
Yeah, that's my point.
It was like pristine.
I know, they were dressed quite well, and it was just strange that they would want to trade for the pajamas that were actually very dirty at this point.
Yeah. Maybe that building actually has a laundry in it.
I mean, maybe we're just supposed to believe their clothes were not in better condition and they didn't want to put the main actors in rags, but really that's what would happen, right? If they're just living in the streets.
Right.
Well, anyway, this deal seems to work as Sisko and Bashir are now in less conspicuous clothing. Sisko says, at least we look like we belong here. And Bashir says, and now we smell just as bad too, which is quite gross. As they're going up the stairs in the building, they stumble across a guy protecting his son with a knife. His son is like an older kid, maybe in his teens, and he looks injured. Julian offers to look at the kid, who was beaten up by some ghosts. Somehow in a few seconds, he determines that the kid is going to be fine if his dad can get some alcohol to clean the wounds, and the guy runs off to find some.
Sisko did try to stop Bashir here.
He did, but he said, just let me look, and he did let him do that. And in the end, he didn't really have to do anything, but he did tell him to go and get some alcohol, which maybe the guy wouldn't have done otherwise. I don't know.
Can't help to look, said Bashir.
Yep.
Next thing you know, you've set up a clinic, and you're saving people who would die.
Right. Well, as they leave the building, the dad runs after them, saying the district needs another doctor. The guy says, you two are new here, and you may as well accept that you're never getting out of here, and the only way to get any help is to help each other and to get organized. He says, if you want to be left alone, fine, but if you want to help us, you know where to find me. This is really frustrating to Sisko, but they walk off.
Yeah, it must be killing him. The way he does that sigh and a shrug.
Yep. Yeah.
Definitely. This must just be against all your principles. When you've spent your life working within the Federation and trying to do the best. And here you have to force yourself not to do it.
And they're also not used to seeing people like in San Francisco, right? Or humans suffering like this and just needing something simple to help them.
And if they have, they've probably seen it from the relief side of things, of them specifically going there to help.
True. Well, now we go to the contrasting situation that Dax is in. She's all dressed up at a fancy party, listening to people drone on about Europe and the rest of the world falling apart, while they've got it all figured out here.
Wow, Dax looks just amazing.
Yeah, she is very dressed up.
This is probably one of the best steampunk cosplays I've ever seen.
It really is.
Yeah, I'm looking at it thinking,
Yeah.
wow, that's kind of steampunk.
And I also love how she's got her comm badge on the outside, which just sort of adds to the overall look. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely how the other half are living.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And Dax fits right in there.
Absolutely. She's very happy to be there, especially if she knew what the other two were going through with peeing in the street.
Oh.
Well, David Bowie tells the boring party guests about Jadzia's mugging. One of the party guests says she was very lucky that David Bowie found her instead of the police, or she would have ended up in the sanctuary district. He says it's the only way to keep those people, in double quotes, off the streets.
Oh.
He seems nice.
Yeah.
Dax then quietly asks the tall guy if her friends could have been taken to the sanctuary district, and he says it'll be hard to find out since the sanctuary district's records aren't posted on the net. But I'm pretty sure Dax can hack her way in there.
That's what I would have thought.
Just give her a stylus. She'll be fine.
This was one of those classic Star Trek hit you over the head with the point scene.
Oh, yeah.
They cut from the abject poverty of the 21st century Hooverville to this very nice party being held by the 1%.
Yep, absolutely. And where they could talk about the problems of the world.
Oh, yeah.
Making decisions from paradise.
Yeah. And Dax has that look of mild revulsion on her face when they're talking about events.
Right. Well, Bashir and Sisko are now in a dinner line, complaining about the line not moving. Sisko heads off to see what's holding up the line, and Bashir gets into some trouble with the thug guy in a hat who tries to steal his food card. Sisko comes up behind the guy, and a fight breaks out. A guy from the crowd steps into the fight to try and help, but the hat guy stabs him and kills him.
I think in what must be one of the most dramatic on-screen stabbings in Star Trek history.
Was it dramatic? I don't even remember.
I thought it seemed quite dramatic. Oh, and his hat. His hat just doesn't come off. Doesn't matter what's happening. Sisko's punching him, they're fighting, they're rolling on the ground. The hat stays on.
Well, it's the future. Hats stay on.
Oh.
As helicopters approach, Bashir and Sisko run to the dead guy and try to help, since they are to blame for this. Sisko takes his ID card and pulls Bashir off of him, and they take off running. They manage to elude the Ghostbuster cops, but, and I think we all saw this coming, they now have a big problem because the dead guy was Gabriel Bell. So the very thing they were trying to avoid is the thing that they caused.
On a positive note, though, Sisko did get his food card, so they'll have extra rations.
Yeah, I thought that was funny that they stole his food card. And are there no cameras that see this happen?
I was thinking about that too, about the cameras and the surveillance. I'm guessing that the budget is so low, they just don't care.
For sure.
They have no interest. It's a dumping ground, basically.
Yeah, just drag the dead bodies away.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah,
in fact,
that's awful.
They probably see it as a plus of,
maybe
they're fighting amongst themselves. That's one less mouth to feed.
Well, after the ad break, they're pretty sure that they've ruined everything. Bashir wonders what will happen now, and Sisko says we have to make sure those hostages survive. And Bashir agrees.
Sisko steps straight into leadership mode here. He now has an objective, and he's going to do it.
That is true. We go back to the Defiant, and Kira has changed into her rebel clothes. And Miles has a new green jacket rebel outfit. This is new.
Okay, I thought these clothes looked a little bit familiar, so I went back and watched the scenes in Homecoming, and they are exactly the same outfit.
No.
It is. She is,
yes. But he had like a loose collar.
Yeah, Miles
I remember looked terrible.
Miles had a turtleneck. He's changed the shirt, but the rest of it is exactly the same.
So he wore that jacket too?
Yeah.
I don't remember the jacket. Probably because I was so distracted by the ugly shirt under it. So, okay. So they just changed the ugly shirt under it, and now it looks like a whole new outfit.
Yes.
Okay.
But cool. Kira's is identical.
Oh, yeah. No, hers I recognize immediately because she has that stupid macrame vest on.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
From the 70s. Yeah. Well, Miles tells Kira that Starfleet headquarters says their plan is too risky because they might contaminate the timeline during the search. She wants to talk to Admiral Wright, but when Miles goes to call him or her, I don't know who Admiral Wright is, we find that Starfleet is actually non-existent. So the death of Bell has had quite a far-reaching impact. And this is like the city on the edge of forever when the Enterprise is just gone, right?
Yes.
And they're stuck on that planet.
I'm also now even more convinced that this was an inspiration for First Contact.
Yeah, again, very similar.
Their ship's intact and is covered by chronoton particles, and the Earth below has changed.
Yeah, Miles says something about the Defiant was protected by some kind of subspace bubble created during the singularity.
Yeah.
Very flimsy. Also with the some kind of, right? Some kind of something that was protecting them. But no problem. I'm fine with it. It's all good. It's all Star Trek. Back in the Sanctuary District, they've gone to visit their dad friend who was protecting his kid, telling him they've changed their minds and they want to help. He says, this place is about to explode. Most of us were promised jobs, but there are no jobs. We've been forgotten, and we need to make them remember. He says there will be a rally the day after tomorrow to remind the people outside that we aren't criminals. Bashir and Sisko agree to spread the word.
At least they're now doing something.
That is true. Meanwhile, Dax's tall friend has discovered that Jadzia's friends actually are in the Sanctuary District, but getting them out isn't that easy because they'll have to find them.
He's totally bought into the lie. Quote,
yeah.
It's a safe place for people to stay.
Yeah, he says, don't worry, they're safe in there. That's the whole point of the sanctuary, to give people in need a place to stay and to be fed. Dax very astutely asks, well, if that's all it's for, why is there a wall around it? That's a very good question.
Oh, she so calls him out.
Yeah, and he has no answer for that. The scene ends really awkwardly. Yep. Now, Sisko and Bashir are walking the district, spreading the word of the rally, and they hear an explosion and a commotion, and they run toward it. They find people are rioting outside of the processing center, which is the DMV, and they're beating on, I think it's the younger Ghostbuster guard from earlier.
Yeah.
Sisko grabs one of the guns, and he shoots into one of the flaming trash cans, which seems very dangerous in this crowd of people.
It makes the point, though.
Bashir grabs the guard, and they head into the processing center as the riots continue. And inside, we find the terrible hat guy, Thug, of course, taking everyone hostage, including the DMV employee who helped Sisko and Bashir earlier. Hat Guy assumes that because he's armed, Sisko is there to help. He says he's making a political statement, and he keeps calling Sisko new boy, which I find very upsetting every time he does it.
Was he making that into a racial statement there, or was he just...
It certainly felt racial to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, Sisko says his name is Bell, Gabriel Bell, to be continued. Drama.
Oh, Bashir, he just has all the expressions in this episode.
Yeah, the look of shock on his face.
They do that cut to him, and he just gives that look of, oh, crap.
I mean, it was very convenient that Gabriel Bell looked a bit like Sisko. Yeah. What if he had looked like Bashir? Would he have made Bashir do it?
Well, that's an interesting point. I don't know how that would work out. I mean, if they don't really care about the people in the Sanctuary District. So if he just used Bell's name, maybe it wouldn't have mattered what he looked like.
Yeah, maybe.
It would have just been, Bell would have been this symbol regardless.
Yeah.
That's a good question, though.
Well, we've reached the end of the episode, and it's part 1, obviously, and we have not yet watched part 2. Well, I have not yet watched part 2.
Yes.
So what is your over-analysis?
Okay. We have a few things we can talk about here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the first one is, and I hinted on this earlier, so how much do you think it is killing Dax not being able to say, well, in my 8 lifetimes?
Yeah. Well, now she can add to, and in the time that I was in the past.
Oh.
When I went back in time.
Oh, gosh, yeah. I mean, she missed out on being the non-corporeal. So, yeah, this kind of makes up for it a little.
I'm sure she can make use of it.
Well, and following on from this.
Yeah.
I would wonder if Dax was actually alive at this point in time on Trill, or wherever the Trill were hanging out at that time. It's approximately 360 years earlier.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I guess if you have lived, 7 lifetimes?
Well, 6 full lifetimes, really.
You would be more than 300 years old.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I did a little digging into Dax's timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I can tell, it's a bit of a mess in terms of canon.
Like how old Dax is?
Yes.
I always want to say she is, but yeah, we're talking about Dax. Yeah, not Jadzia. Yeah.
Because just from some digging,
the
length of time Dax was in certain hosts doesn't seem to match the timeline of what we've seen in episodes. So I guess there's a fair amount of hand-waving with Dax's past hosts.
I'm not surprised. So yeah, maybe Dax has memories of this place.
And that leads on to something else.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if Dax is stuck in the past and she's also wealthy or has access to money and, hack the computers or do whatever. If she could hang around in this timeline and basically there'd be a Dax, like Data's head thing.
Yeah. Like Guinan in Next Gen.
Yeah, kind of like that. Well, Guinan actually lived in the past. Dax would actually be outside of her timeline, so she'd actually exist simultaneously.
Yeah, but Data wasn't.
Exactly what I mean. So, because we now know that humans can take Trill hosts, so could she basically survive to 2360 something when Sisko is in the future and tell them, hey, I'm back here. I'm stuck. Get me home.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess Dax could easily have done that, yes. Except for, at this point, the symbiont is several hundred years old. I don't know how long do they actually live.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
That would mean that it would have to live another 300 years.
Yeah, the symbiont would be at least 600, 700 years old at that point.
Put them out to pasture at some point or into the breeding ponds or whatever, but I don't think they ever said at what age. So maybe.
Yeah. And I suppose as well, there's also, she has to survive the Third World War and Colonel Green.
True.
Quite a lot to survive there.
Well, and also remember, she tells us at the beginning of season 2 that insect bites are very deadly, and I don't think she's in a good place to avoid insect bites for 300 years. Yeah.
Also a very good point.
Right.
Okay, next point.
Yeah.
I find the Sanctuary District very reminiscent of The Hoop from Halo Jones, which is Alan Moore's, probably his best work, in my opinion. Basically, it was where they dumped the unemployed, so, quote, nobody has to look at them.
And that was like from the 80s, or when was that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Halo Jones was mid-80s. Great book. I advise anybody to read it. It's dated a little bit. Some of it's a little kind of clunky, but still a great story.
I don't think it's very far-fetched to believe that in America, we would build these sorts of districts and like lock people in. And it's certainly not hard to believe that people with mental health issues who couldn't afford help because of lack of health care, right?
Yeah.
Would end up sort of grouped in with folks who are just unemployed. And also, we continue to not deal with the problems of unemployment and jobs disappearing, but the lack of education and blah, 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 right? I just don't think these things are very far-fetched. So it's a little bit scary, actually, to see it in practice.
Yeah.
I really like it, when Star Trek picks up on some of these social issues.
Right.
And quite frequently, though, they'll do it in kind of a silly way and really hit you over the head with it.
Yes.
Like some of the episodes where, for example, women are in charge of the society and the men are the second-class citizens. And, isn't that terrible? It's just like, okay, that's a little ham-fisted. Whereas this is actually a much more nuanced approach to it.
Yes.
But the funny thing is the way they get the point across is they just tell you.
Yeah.
There's a couple of scenes where Sisko just like vomits all this information onto you. And if he didn't do that, I think they would have to do it in a more ham-fisted way. So I actually appreciate the way that they did it and that they broke it up into 2 episodes. So there's time to show it. It was good.
Well, and they do it in 2 separate sections. They do Sisko in the processing center explaining to Bashir.
Yes.
And then walking through the streets.
Actually 3 times, because he starts talking about it the first time they're walking through the streets. And then he does another couple of expositions in the DMV and then again later. So there's a lot of explaining, but it's very effective.
Right. And I think it also draws from the history of the Hoovervilles from the 30s.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that.
Oh, you don't?
Does it have something to do with vacuum cleaners?
No. Hoovervilles were basically shanty towns that were named after President Hoover, whose handling of the Great Depression was somewhat less than stellar.
Yeah, I do remember that.
And I think my final point.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the riots have started kicking off at the end of this episode. So do you think Sisko was a little bit fuzzy about when they actually started? He said the first week of September.
He did, and it was like still a week later.
Do you think Sisko and Bashir's actions here, like that fight and the killing of Bell, actually kicked off the riots? So they were changing the timeline.
Well, it's certainly possible that they caused it to start a little bit sooner. I mean, it seemed like it was already kind of going on over by the processing center. Like maybe there was constant ongoing protesting going on out there. I don't know. But they definitely impacted it in many ways. And it's because of that, different people are probably killed because they're in different locations or it's different days. So I don't think there's any way for them to not impact the future.
It's just a question of how much they impact the future,
Yes, exactly.
You get Zephyrin Cochrane's grandmother killed.
Yeah, right.
Big problem. Because I feel that they inadvertently changed the timeline.
Yeah, now the Bell Rats will probably be known as happening in the last week of August 2024
Yes.
instead of the first week in September.
Yeah, Sisko should go and look that up when he gets home.
Yes, he should.
Oh, well, and my final point, and this almost goes
Yeah.
back to your hitting people over the head with things. So the security within the sanctuary districts, we joke they look like the Ghostbusters. And the Ghostbusters, as people pointed out, basically it was a movie about exterminators.
Yeah.
Do you think there was a deliberate choice of them dressing the security like that to give
Yeah.
it a look, to give an impression that these guys were basically dealing with what the city or the wealthy, the elite, considered vermin? That it was a stylistic point to emphasize that?
Well, that's an interesting question. Maybe a little bit of a stretch, but maybe.
I thought it was deliberate.
I would think if you were creating a show like that, that is the kind of stuff that you would do. So maybe. I always think it's maybe something pragmatic, like they had the outfits in the back or something, and they had to use them again. Oh, this one fits this guy. Let's just use this.
Yeah, we spent all our budget doing the street scenes and the subway scenes and the office block and all this. So we've got to cut back on something. What's the cheapest costumes we can get?
Right. Yeah, I mean, there wasn't anything particularly memorable about their outfits, and it didn't really even seem like they were great in terms of protecting the guys who were wearing them. And I don't know. It just, the first time I saw them, in fact, I think the first time I saw it was in the thumbnail, maybe on Hulu. I'm not sure. One of the streaming services. And I think I even said to you when I saw it, oh, it's an episode about Ghostbusters. And then I didn't even think anything of it. And then later when I watched it, I was just like, oh my God, they really do look like Ghostbusters.
Okay, that wraps it up for my analysis.
I think my only overanalysis point is I always get confused about the time stuff when something happens in the past. Like when Belle died.
Yeah.
And then on the Defiant, it seemed like it was happening in parallel that Starfleet disappeared. Whereas wouldn't it have happened immediately when they transported away?
That's an interesting point.
That kind of stuff always bothers me because I'm like, no, it's already happened hundreds of years ago. It doesn't make any difference. You don't have to go days because it's happened.
I think because they're surrounded by this bubble of chronoton particles, that it's allowing their timeline to sort of progress. So the things are slowly filtering through on the outside.
No. That doesn't make any sense.
I'm solving the problem with Star Trek science.
Okay. Head canon. Okay. All right. Well, let's move to women in the future.
Okay.
I don't have a lot to say here. I do think that Dax was maybe enjoying her time in the nice clothes and the fancy party a little bit too much, and she wasn't looking really hard to find Bashir and Sisko. She seemed like she had just moved in. That's what reminded me of Guinan when we were talking earlier about that episode from Next Gen, Time's Arrow. She just, she's partying. She's shopping for new clothes. She got her hair done. Meanwhile, the other two are sleeping in the street.
Yes.
I don't know. I thought that was funny. Of course, I did appreciate Kira, who was just ready to start time hopping without much info. And she's just like, don't care about the risk. This is what I do. I'm going to jump in and we're going to find the crew.
And she immediately takes command of the Defiant.
Well, she is the first officer. He does report to her.
But she's not Starfleet.
That doesn't.
It's a Starfleet ship.
But that doesn't matter. That's never mattered on this in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
She has always been the first officer, regardless of the fact that she's Bajoran. And Miles has always called her Sir.
Yeah.
So it would make sense. It's like because now she's the captain of the ship, right? People keep telling me. That's how it works. Doesn't matter if your rank is captain. Once you're running the ship, you're the captain. And she's the first officer. So when the captain is gone, now she's the captain. Yep.
As some actual Navy people have told you.
Yeah. Well, that's really all that I had for women in the future. There wasn't really a lot else to say about it. So let's go to rating. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. What is your rating?
My rating is absolute thumbs up. Love this episode. I've seen this episode a few times. It has high watchability as it's great Star Trek.
Yeah, I also give it a thumbs up. I really enjoyed it. And it felt very familiar to me, and I'm not sure why. I don't think I saw it before. Maybe you talked about it before, or maybe I've heard about it or something. I'm not really sure. And I didn't know what was going to happen except for the Gabriel Bell thing. Yeah. I absolutely knew that was coming. I just don't know how you wouldn't know that was coming.
I know I've talked to you about this episode before.
So maybe that's where I got it from. But even with that sense of familiarity, I really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to the next one. And we had to put this off a week because you needed a root canal and all kinds of other things that went on over last week. And I'm just like chomping at the bit. I want to jump to the next one and see what happens. And as soon as we're done recording, I'm going to go and watch it.
Yes, this is a great episode. I think the only things I'm going to add is I'm surprised Dax didn't do a lot more research, but I'm thinking the time scale between her getting to the hotel and then this party that she was invited to, she might not have had enough time to do a lot of research.
Research into the time that she's in, you mean?
Yes, into the society.
I don't know what Dax is doing. That's what I mean. It just felt like she went out and bought herself a dress for the party.
Yeah.
Instead of doing what she should have been doing. At the same time, diving too much into something and not taking stock of your surroundings in this particular situation could be very dangerous. It's much better for her if she realizes there's a risk of her getting thrown into the sanctuary district, especially now, then it makes sense that she would take stock, figure out what to do next, be pragmatic, and then find Sisko and Bashir and get the heck out of there. At the same time, she's the science officer, so she should be thinking about how did I get here and how do I get out?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I look forward to the next one. I assume that Miles and Kira are coming in their rebel outfits, so we'll see.
I'm not telling you, no spoilers.
Okay, so that is it for Season 3, Episode 11. Come back next week for Episode 12. In the meantime, if you'd like to send us your own overanalysis of this or any episode, or if you just want to say something nice, please email us at rebingeit@gmail.com. We haven't had a lot of email lately, even though our numbers are really going up in terms of listeners. So welcome to all of the new listeners. Feel free to send us an email at rebingeit@gmail.com, or you can tweet us at rebingeit. Also check us out on talkthroughmedia.com. You can listen to all of our other awesome podcasts there, and you can leave feedback on individual episodes.
Thanks for joining us on the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.